Welcome into another episode of Fhs Season Tickets. I'm Michael.
And I'm Christian.
And we are joined by an awesome guest, Bill Wilson. Would you like to say hello?
Yes, hello to everybody out there in Ohio.
And he was actually the author of a protest that could change college athletics forever. Could you talk about spatting and your article in general?
Sure. Of course, there are a lot of people who are critical of the current NCAA structure and the extent to which amateurism leaves many of its players without a fair share of the income that they tend to be responsible for generating. So a lot of those critics have focused on long-range solutions, like going to Congress to get statutory change or lobbying the NCAA to generate change through that organization, which has always been slow to react to anything. And so I was looking around for some way to effect much quicker change and the kind of change that could be gotten by player action itself. And you all probably know that at Missouri, for example, last year, the football team threatened to strike and within a couple of days caused the university president to resign. So they have power, the players have power. But strikes are complicated. The Northwestern Union certification campaign came up short after a 2 or 3 year period of litigation. So I was looking for something that would give them a quick, powerful tool. And came up with this notion of, I'm hearing a beeping here. Are we doing okay?
Yeah, we're doing good. The audio's fine.
Yeah, okay. Came up with this notion of spatting. Spatting, people know probably with a marching band. You whiten the foot and the ankle, and it gives a sort of flashiness to the band's appearance when it marches. But spatting for the athlete, for the player, is defined in many of the contracts between Nike or Under Armour or Adidas and a university to be the blocking out of the logo, which is done with some kind of tape, usually white tape that's used to tape up your ankles or other joints. And according to those contracts that are entered into between the schools and Nike, for example, spatting is a big no-no. Nike does not like it, and in fact, the contracts, which require that every player wear the apparel that displays logos, the contracts also say that if, for example, at the University of Texas, where Nike has a contract, 5 players all simultaneously spat, that results in a one-game loss of $100,000 in income for the University of Texas. And if they do it for 2 straight games, those same 5 players, the total fine or clawback by Nike is $250,000. So my proposal is that that kind of tool can be used by a relatively small number of players on one team to generate change. And the change that I think is most important on a triage basis is the ability to get at good long-term health insurance, which the players don't have right now.
So you're looking at good long-term health insurance over potentially paying the players, or also, like in the Lamar Jackson case that just happened with the Louisville football team, making money off of autographs. Is your main goal of this to get long-term health insurance, or is another goal to get the players some money and getting paid to play college sports, or also being able to make money off their signature?
Well, obviously it's up to the players on any specific team what they might pick out. I would support almost any of those efforts. I think that the current effort, the current status quo puts a number of controls on the player that are unwarranted and don't recognize his market value. So I support paying players. I support their pay being set by market factors just like every other employee. The market will pay you something that is related to your actual value on the street. I also support players being able to sell their autographs. But each of those measures would require upsetting one of the axiomatic, the central rules which the NCAA applies now. That is, the rules that players can't be paid, and that players can't be paid for use of their name, image, and likeness on the side. The nice thing about seeking better health insurance is that it is not proscribed by NCAA regulation. It can be done now. The schools just don't do it and because it would mean additional cost. So it's an easy tool to use for a remedy which doesn't require upsetting some of the basic rules of the NCAA's definition of amateurism.
So all the schools are making so much money off these athletes. What do you think is stopping them from doing these type of protests?
Well, nobody really knows about this spatting vehicle. At least I've never seen anybody else come up with this. So it's it'll take some time to get out. Whether or not somebody picks it up and some team does it, I don't know. But there are pragmatic factors. The way it stands, if I'm a good player coming out of high school and I go to Northwestern, say, I want to play. I want playing time, and coaches don't like troublemakers. So there are those kinds of pragmatic factors. The need for playing time, the need for recognition, that cause players to not want to rock any boats. The power to coach is pretty overwhelming when you're an undergraduate at one of these programs. And there are also a lot of social pressures, as you guys know, from teammates and all. You have to have the right circumstance. I think this is a tool where the threshold is a lot lower to have people act. It's an easy thing to do. It's quick. And as I said in my article, I think there's a reasonable prospect that if players made a demand using the threat of spatting, they wouldn't have to spat in the end because the schools will want to avoid all the hubbub and the bad publicity, and also losing the cash, the big chunks of money that they would lose if the spatting goes ahead. So at least the way I look at it, I think that it's a good tool, even as just a threat that might result in some big chunks of money in the form of health insurance moving into the players' column.
Do you think there is another way to protest against the universities other than just statting?
Well, as I said, striking would be, there was a great story back in '91, I think it was, when UNLV had one of the top basketball teams in the country, and they went to the March Madness semifinals, and I don't remember who they played, but according to the players, they had resolved that if they won that game, I think they were playing Duke. If they won that game, they were going to strike. They were going to refuse to come out on the court for the final championship game in March Madness. They lost the game, so they never got to the final. And there are a few other stories. There was a guy named Dick DiVenzio who was very active. He played at Duke when I was there, and he was active back in the '80s, trying to generate better benefits and better protections for the players. And he had talked with Charles Davis, who was a running back at the time at Tennessee, and who is now a Fox football commentator. And they had planned, Davis and a few others had planned to strike while they were for a Tennessee game that fall. But as Davis described it, a trainer came to him and said, "Now, Charles, are you really planning on striking?" And Davis said all he could think of was playing time. I'm going to lose playing time. So he looked at the trainer and said, oh, no, not me. I'm not going to strike. And the thing died. So it takes a whole lot of chutzpah to pull that off. But that kind of thing, whether it's a football or a basketball game, if a team can say, hey, we're not going out on the field, or we're not going out on the court, it's a tremendously powerful move. And something like that, or something like Spatting, is going to happen. And particularly in this day and age, where I think what you've seen with Colin Kaepernick and a number of black players falling in line with Kaepernick, you're going to see, I think, more momentum for pushing to get better treatment for the big-time college athletes.
Yeah.
I think, like you mentioned with the Colin Kaepernick, how he kind of got the ball rolling. I think once one university does Spatting, then I would think a number of other universities would quickly join in.
Yeah.
And what do you think the school's initial response would be if somebody actually did it? Do you think the problem will get resolved within a week or two, or do you think that if a team did this, it could go on for more than a month and the school could lose out on all the money?
I tend to think it would be a short-term, not a long-term problem, because, as I suggested, I think the school might solve it right away by agreeing to set up the longer and better health insurance, because they want to avoid any fuss. But if they let it go once, the longer they let it go, the more trouble it is for them. The second game that happens, it's say at Texas, instead of with 5 guys Spatting, the second game it's $150,000 combined with the previous game's $100,000 clawback. So that's a lot of money. Moreover, the contracts suggest that if they're once Nike has given notice that they have recognized that there has been spatting going on and they want it to stop, if it doesn't stop, it is deemed a material breach of the contract. And material breach, that means the contract's over. So say if you've got, like at Texas, I forget the precise number, but I think it's $160 million. If you've got a 10-year contract in Texas for $160 million, and you've got the prospect of two or possibly 3 games of spatting by a few players, causing your entire contract to be void, that is a huge, huge risk for a school.
Yeah.
And there are people involved, chief financial officers, loss control people in the athletic department who would pull their hair out about it and would say, look, you're looking at a material breach here for a huge contract for us. This will wreck all of our budgeting for the next 10 years. So there's a lot of motivation, I think, on the part of the school to settle it and get into the demand.
I know that somebody who's been very vocal about this issue about NCAA athletes has been Josh Rosen, and he's a very marketable brand, projected to be a top 10 draft pick in 2018 NFL draft, and he's talked a lot about getting more for the athletes, but hasn't had any solutions. Would you expect someone like him to maybe start the trend? Because I feel like he talks about the issue a lot, and he's been very vocal about the issue and wants it to be solved. Do you think that a guy like him would be the perfect guy to start the issue? Somebody who's noteworthy and a knowledgeable person?
That's a real good point. I mean, I'm kind of amazed at what Rosen has said. He's pretty forthright, and he's pretty smart, and he's made clear the general thrust of his opinion, which is that the system is corrupt and the players need more. He's the perfect kind of guy to do it. Now, my memory is that Ncaa, his coach, took him aside after some comments and said, you need to concentrate on the game, first of all. So I'm sure he feels some pressure. Secondly, I don't think he's performed quite as well as people had expected that he might be performing so far this season. So he might also feel slightly more constrained. But the guy, I really admire what he has said. But I think that's a little bit. I mean, I'd be interested to know what you guys think. But I think the younger kids coming up have a lot more sympathy toward the notion that it's a bad deal for the athlete, and that a lot of these players, particularly the big time ones, should get a lot more and probably be paid. Do you think that's a fair assessment of your generation?
Yeah, I would say that our generation has been a lot more progressive in trying to like solve issues, and when we see something that we think is unjust, I feel like our generation takes a lot more action. But like you were talking about the Rosen thing, he wore an F Trump hat to a golf course owned by Donald Trump, so that was when Mora told him to kind of focus about football and look at how he was. I still love Josh Rosen. Don't necessarily agree with that decision to wear that hat, but I still love what he's doing. I think he's a great football player, but I think he might be an even better presence off the field. And there's just so many great stories about him. And I kind of have a theory about college athletics, and I kind of want you to hear my opinion, like give your thoughts about it.
Sure.
I think that the reason why we haven't had so much progress in college athletics is because of the few sports that make money to the university is so small. Like the football makes a ton of money, men's basketball makes a ton of money, women's basketball in some schools makes money, also baseball in some schools make money. I feel like if the Ncaa started to pay athletes like the football players, guys like Christian McCaffrey, guys like Josh Rosen, or basketball players like Melo Trimble or Grayson Allen, then you'd have the men's golf or the women's swimmers or the men's cross country would be complaining that they never got any money when their sport doesn't really make money to the school anywhere close to the extent as the football and basketball team. So I feel like if they started to pay the basketball and football players, then it would just create too much problems to the other sport, and you'd kind of have a war between football and basketball athletes and also women's basketball and potentially baseball versus every single other sport in the school, and they're trying to avoid that conflict. Would you say that's a reasonable assessment, or am I just crazy?
No, I like it. I think you're pretty well spot on. A couple of points I would make. I mean, as you suggest, the interests of the revenue athlete, basketball and football, basically. It's a few schools you've got women's basketball that makes money, some hockey, some baseball, but you can just narrow it down for ease of discussion to football and basketball. The interest of those players at the big-time schools is directly in conflict with the interests of all the other teams because they fund all those other teams. So 9 times out of 10, they are not in the same camp economically and in terms of protections that are needed. But the way the system runs right now, the NCAA loves to address both sides. They talk like buccaneering, mercantile traders, talking about their brand and gross income and all these things that make it a business on the one hand, but then they like to turn and talk about all the Girl Scout cookies they sold, handing out scholarships to other non-revenue sports. That tension is built into the way the whole system works. And to my way of thinking, you need to separate those issues. But the other issue that a lot of people overlook is the club sport. Okay? Everybody acts like club sports don't exist. And my argument is that all those non-revenue sports, many of them aren't much different than club sports, except that they've decided to give out scholarships for them. There is the same opportunity to play a sport that you love in club sports at almost every school across the country. Many club sports have national championship. It's a championship ladder. And all the litigation, all the debate about whether the big-time athlete ought to be paid overlooks that factor. The availability of good quality intercollegiate play, club sports. My daughter went to Duke and she played club field hockey. They traveled all around Carolina and South Carolina on weekends and played games. The only difference is they didn't have scholarships. So my theory is that a lot of those sports ought to be backed down and make them club sports. Do the same thing. The difference then is it's not a spectacle. A spectacle is where you are performing for a crowd. And I don't really understand why anybody is worried with respect to many of these sports, whether or not there is performance for a crowd. There aren't crowds there to watch them now. So that's the other distinction. The two distinctions that are relevant to, I think, the resolution of these issues. One is the conflict between the revenue and the non-revenue athlete, and the other is the lack of distinction between the non-revenue sport and club sport, other than the fact that scholarships being given.
So are you suggesting that they should take away scholarships from like the smaller sports that don't make money, or did I misinterpret that?
No, you followed me. I am driven by the conviction that there are a number of, in football and basketball, predominantly black athletes, many of them from disadvantaged backgrounds, who have their moment in the sun to build a reputation and make some money from the talent that they have. They may not be a superstar, i.e., they may not be able to go to the pros and play, but they have an opportunity, and they should make that money that they earn, rather than doling it out to, some tennis team player, so that he can have a scholarship. I don't see the logical connection, because none of those other sports, again, you can talk about baseball and women's basketball and hockey in a few places, but generally none of those other sports draw any appreciable crowd. And so there's no reason, and nobody else has made this argument, but I don't really see much reason to have them grab that cash that should go in the pocket of the big-time player on the football or basketball team in order to have a scholarship.
Yeah.
That's not probably a particularly popular opinion in some circles, but I think logic compels it.
Do you think if college athletes got paid, do you think in a sport like college basketball where everyone, nowadays back then it was the athletes would stay in school 2-3 years to get ready for basketball, and now everyone's just a one and done at Kentucky. Do you think if athletes got paid, do you think they would stay another year or two to develop their skills, or do you think they would just want to go into the big leagues right away still and get the big money?
I tend to think it's a bit of guesswork, but I tend to think they would stick around longer.
Yeah.
Because they have the ability to, pay a mortgage, pay rent, live like a real adult, which is what they are. I mean, everybody overlooks it, but because of the 26th Amendment passed in 1971, which lowered the voting age to 18, almost every state in the union simultaneously lowered the age majority from 20 to 21 down to 18, which means that all of these players, with a tiny set of exceptions, all of these players are adults. Mm-hmm. They're real live people who should be able to go to the market and trade their skills for money, just like anybody else.
Yeah.
But nobody recognizes that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the schools and the NCAA like to paint the picture as though these are still kids. I refuse to call them kids. Once they're 18, they're adults, and they're entitled to cash for what they do with a majority of their time for a sport which generates massive amounts of money.
Yeah.
So would you say that the NCAA has taken the side of the smaller sports by letting college athletes who compete in the Olympics make money off of their name during the Olympics and while they're going on? Would you say that's pro smaller sports from the NCAA, while basketball and football players, no college athletes are really going to be going to the Olympics for that? So would you say that the NCAA is towards the smaller sports right now by letting those Olympic athletes make money off their name even while they're still in school?
Well, my reaction to that is that it's hard to impute logic or reason to much of anything the NCAA does. And the fact that those Olympic athletes can go and somehow generate 100,000, 200,000 dollars out of their performance at the Olympics, and nonetheless compete later with an Ncaa school, just demonstrates the absurdity of the principle. Either money in the palm of the player or the athlete is good or it's bad. It can't be good for one sport and bad for another sport. It's absurd. They do like to, I mean, you listen to these conference commissioners or Mark Emmert, even ADs. They love to talk about, the wonderful things that they, the athletic directors, talk about the wonderful things they do for all of these athletes. We have, Dave Brandon in Michigan. We have 900 athletes here, all of them on scholarship, and we're doing all these great things for them. And then they throw in, or as Chris Plonke said, the assistant AD at Texas, I don't want to see the day when our Olympic athletes don't have some place to train. That would damage our country significantly. Well, that's not really the job of a state university. If the federal government, there's a lack of funding for Olympic athletes, and I don't begrudge them having access to facilities at universities, but it doesn't make much sense for, again, the predominantly black players on football and basketball teams to be funding the United States Olympic teams or participants in other sports. It's crazy.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Christian, do you have anything
No.
to ask? I think that this could be, like your article could be really interesting about like progressing college athletics, and also I'm hoping to talk about college basketball with like another guy like Matt Norlander. He's the guy who made a really interesting article about players not even going to college and just skipping it, like Emmanuel Mudiay, and also there's another one this year, I think Terrence Ferguson, who was supposed to go to Arizona. He didn't go to Arizona. He's playing overseas. So I think I'm going to try to get him on, discuss this a little bit, and yeah, that's going to wrap it up. Christian, anything to say before we go?
No, it was just nice to talk to you.
Yeah, great talking to you.
Good talking to you guys.
Yeah, great talking to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you. That will wrap it up for this episode of FHS Season Tickets. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. Some great conversation. Like I mentioned at the end, I'm going to try to get Matt Norlander onto the show. I've tweeted at him a good amount of times. He still hasn't responded. So hopefully we'll be able to do that, and we'll be able to talk about college basketball and how players can go to college instead of going overseas.